All right, well, thank you for coming. It's really early, and I am super jet lagged, so that's going to be a great combination. I'm just hoping the words that come out of my mouth make sense when you put them one after the other. That is the high bar I'm setting for this presentation. All you in the back can come on in, sit down. There's some seats. Or you can linger back there. That's cool, too. So yes, this is a sponsored talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about Firebase and analytics and Google and how they all work together. But hopefully I'll try and make it worth your while, where we all learn a little something. And if not, well, at least I will talk fast. Because we've been chatting with game developers out there, and some have never even heard of Firebase, which is sad, but that's okay. Some folks maybe have heard the name but don't really know what Firebase is, and some folks maybe checked it out 3 years ago and kind of don't know what we've been up to lately. And I know maybe some of you are here because we said we would sort of clear up the difference between Google Analytics and Google Analytics for mobile and Firebase Analytics, which has also now been called Google Analytics, and we will get into that later. But first, let me back up here and tell you about Firebase, which is a suite of tools and services from Google that make it easier for you to build more successful games. And how do we do that? With a whole bunch of products. There's 19 of these things here, and I think I have 16 minutes left, so I'm not going to get to talk about all of them in depth. But let me talk about sort of some of my favorites. We sort of group this into 3 categories. This first one on the left are sort of a number of tools that make it easier for your engineers to simply get your game up and running. These are kind of like the backend as a service tools that generally make it easier for you to store data in the cloud and that kind of thing. So a couple of my favorites, you got the real-time database, which is sort of the original product that Firebase, when it was a startup, launched with. It's what a lot of people think of when they hear about Firebase. And it's good for sort of easily syncing your game state sort of across different clients in close to real time with sort of very little work required on your part. The idea is you sort of make a change in one client, and sort of our libraries and services automatically propagate that to all the other clients that are listening to that value. I should point out here, real time, because game developers have a different sense of real time. We mean sort of a couple of tenths of a second here. So you wouldn't use it to power, say, a first-person shooter, but you could totally use it to power a poker game or a Clash type game, or add in-game chat to whatever you're doing. Fun fact, it was actually used to power the Google Loteria Doodle. This was a Mexican bingo game that launched on the Google front page in over a dozen countries, including the US. And the real-time database kind of handled the matchmaking and calling out the bingo squares and showing you your opponent's moves as they filled out their cards. And we went from basically 0 usage to literally overnight, many, many, many users. They won't tell us exact numbers, but it was on the Google front page. There was a lot of people. And the whole thing just kind of worked. We were able to sort of just handle all that massive usage, literally overnight, which was kind of neat. We often talk about Cloud Firestore as the next generation of the real-time database. This is sort of a more heavy-duty solution. It's a heavy-duty sort of NoSQL database in the cloud. It's got better querying capabilities and more structured data and multi-region, strongly consistent databases, which is a thing database nerds care about. So any database nerds in the audience? Yeah, woo. However, there's no Unity or C++ support yet for the client libraries, so I'm not going to talk too much more about it here. But keep an eye out at maybe some upcoming game developer conferences, and maybe we'll have some announcements here. Hosting, this is this is actually one of our more popular products because it's sort of very easy, simple hosting of your website. It's SSL by default. We got a global CDN. It's really popular because sort of a lot of developers or marketing folks need a quick one-off marketing site to promote whatever. And Firebase hosting is really good at that, and really inexpensive. So give it a look. And extensions is fairly new. These are sort of prepackaged, customizable solutions that perform a number of common tasks that you as game or app developers might want to do. Like if you want to sort of automatically integrate with MailChimp when a user creates an account, or automatically translate any text that gets uploaded to our database for sort of magically translated chat so all your users can understand each other. We have extensions to handle all of that stuff. And basically just you just say, hey, I want to enable this, and we do most of the work for you. So that's kind of the first grouping. The second grouping here are sort of the services to improve your game's quality. I'm going to call out 2 of my favorites. The first one is Firebase Crashlytics. Wait. Uh-oh. Click. Oh. Do I need to jiggle this? Let me try it again. Oh, wait. Oh. Man, did Keynote crash? Keynote wasn't crash. All right, let's try that again. All right, yay, the second grouping. It's great. Improve your quality. Crashlytics. All right, cool. So basically, this is actually a lot of large game companies actually use Crashlytics in their games. The idea here is if your game were to crash. Whoa.
You're on fire, man.
Uh-oh, did I open the fire door?
No,
All right.
I'm joking, I don't know what that is.
All right, we'll keep talking. Just.
Sorry.
That's all right. So the idea here is like, there we go. Yeah, if your game were to crash, we would go ahead and upload like a stack trace of that crash to our server. So when you go to like the Firebase console, you get really important information like how stable your game is, and sort of what crashes your users are encountering, grouped by cause, prioritized by the ones that are affecting the most users, so you know kind of which ones you should probably be tackling first. And for any individual crash, we give you like a ton of information, like what version your app people are using when they encounter this crash, what devices they're using, how much memory they have left on those devices, and like a nice human readable stack trace, so that hopefully you can sort of debug these issues as fast as possible. So when your users write reviews like, hey, your game crashed on me, fix it, and you're like, well, that was a really helpful bug report, we can give you the information that actually maybe helps you sort of debug those issues. So if you have a game and you don't want it crashing, check out Crashlytics. Test Lab also definitely of interest to a lot of game developers. Basically, we can sort of run your game on like a whole bunch of different devices. We have like over 1,000 real physical test devices sitting in our data centers, and thousands more virtual ones in a variety of like screen sizes and OS versions and manufacturers. And so the idea is you as a game developer would write like a predefined game loop for your game that would sort of run it in a predictable manner. We can go ahead and run this test loop on sort of any device you want, and you'll get like log files and screenshots and videos of Test Lab interacting with your game, and we'll tell you if we run into crashes or performance issues or it hangs, or even sometimes if like UI elements are rendered off screen. So like when you find that your phone doesn't work on like some 3-year-old model that's only available in Asia or something like that, you don't have to go to eBay to find that phone. We can probably run it in the cloud for you. So it's kind of useful. But the last category I'm going to talk about here is sort of the drive user engagement grouping. I guess I really kind of think of these as like improving your retention and ARPU. And I'm kind of assuming that's what most people here are interested in, so I'm going to spend a little more time talking about these. But if you're interested in any of these others, we have a booth just right upstairs. Come talk to us. We got me and like some engineers who know way more than me who can probably give you a lot more information. But I'm going to start by talking about analytics, because that's what drives a lot of these features. And I know it's a little confusing because we've recently gone through a couple of rebrandings and maybe confused some people in the process. I see some nodding. So I'm going to start by talking about classic Google Analytics. This was designed for websites back in 2005, and it was sort of focused on things that web developers in 2005 cared about, like sort of page views and sessions and that kind of stuff, right? And that worked great for a while. And then people started building apps. And they said, hey, you know what? We'd like analytics too. And so we released the Google Analytics for mobile SDKs, which sort of tried to fill that gap for like the mobile app developers. But it was kind of tough because the backend is still essentially focused on sessions and page views. So this was always a little bit of an awkward fit. And so this specific initiative has essentially been deprecated. So if you kind of hear like, oh, GA for mobile has been deprecated, know that it's kind of this older version of the SDK is talking to like this older version of the backend, or I should say classic. And part of the reason this was deprecated is in 2015, the team announced Firebase Analytics, which was sort of a new analytics system designed from the ground up to support games and apps with a focus on like events and users instead of sort of the 2005 sessions and page views model. Now this was later rebranded to Google Analytics for Firebase, which is a product name that absolutely nobody used because it's like just too long to say. And then sort of a few months ago, as the team added a bunch of new features and also added support for more kind of web apps that felt more like apps than websites, they rebranded it again to just Google Analytics, and they changed the logo to these ovally looking things. Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of this rebranding because I think it's kind of confusing. You sort of have these two products, both called Google Analytics, that have sort of two very different models and paradigms with how sort of they consider analytics data. So what I think of as Firebase Analytics is basically now called Google Analytics for App and Web Properties. That's the way you will see it labeled in the Google Analytics website. The old kind of classic 2005 Google Analytics is just referred to as Google Analytics for web properties. So that's kind of the difference between the two. But just know that sort of for all intents and purposes, this Google Analytics app and web property thing is what most people are thinking of when they say Firebase Analytics and what you are probably interested in as game developers. So let's cover sort of what you get when you add Google Analytics app and web properties, to your game. You get a bunch of dashboards. Probably a lot of this should look pretty standard. We've got like sort of your active users and like what your top conversion events are and your daily user engagement. And you can see sort of in-app revenue, and if you're using Crashlytics, you can get some stability reports, retention cohorts, and some basic audience information, that kind of stuff. And you can sort of get more in-depth information on any of these. We'll give you reports on events that you're recording within your app. Like some of these events, the library records automatically for you, like sort of first open and in-app purchase and that kind of thing. But then there's going to be a whole bunch of other events that you're going to report manually, like game started and game failed and game succeeded and user visited my in-app store and user added item to cart, that sort of thing. And sort of by looking at these event reports, you can start to figure out sort of where your users are spending time in your app and what they're doing. Of course, some of these events you can label as conversion events, and then we get you sort of nice attribution information and postbacks and that kind of stuff, so you can see which ad campaigns are bringing you users that do things that you care about within your game. You can get details about your latest release, how quickly people are upgrading to the latest version, how stable it is, if there's any retention problems there, that kind of thing. You get Stream View, which is kind of this nice real-timey view of what's happening in your game right now. It's just kind of fun. And of course, all this can be filtered by like various groups or user properties that you're defining within your game. So if you want to find out if like more women than men initiated a purchase, you can go ahead and like filter this report by like just the users that we have identified as probably male, and then get just sort of that filtered report, and then you can sort of compare it with the general population. And then if you were to actually leave the Firebase website and head on over to the Google Analytics website, you get a few more advanced reports, things like sort of side-by-side breakdowns of your user audience and closed funnels, which is a thing we didn't have for a while, and now we have, and people are very happy because they've been asking about this for a while. And so, all these reports are nice, but really what you want to be doing is kind of taking action on this stuff. It's not just sort of seeing the reports, it's going ahead and like, making changes in your game or experimenting and seeing if they can sort of improve certain aspects of your game. And, sometimes you want to do that to like all the users that are using your game, but sometimes, you want to sort of target specific sets of users, whether it's sort of first-time players or people that are spending money in your game, or like your hardcore competitive, multiplayer users, that kind of thing. And so, we let you build audiences to help sort of target these users. These are basically sort of groups of people that you can sort of configure based on their behavior within your app. Audiences was actually something that wasn't very good a year or two ago in Firebase Analytics, but as of about May of last year, it got significantly better. So, now you can say things like, hey, I would like to find the users who have, played more than 10 rounds in the last 7 days, or like find users who have visited my in-app store 5 times but haven't yet made a purchase. What's up with them? Maybe I need to send them a coupon or something. Or like folks with a lifetime value of more than 60 euros. Okay, these are the players I really care about. I want to make sure they feel loved. And then once you've defined these groups, there's a couple of main ways you can take action. The first is to actually just kind of change the way your app behaves for these users, and you would do that using remote config. If you haven't used remote config, you kind of think of it like a key value store that lives in the cloud, which you can essentially use to overwrite any variable that you have defined within your app. So it's sort of a nice way of making changes within your game without having to release a new version and push it out to the world. So a lot of game developers use this to kind of tweak gameplay settings on the fly. Like if you think about like a tower defense game, if one of your units is like way overpowered, well, that's going to kind of completely ruin your in-game, the balance of your game, and could make it too easy or too hard. And so using remote config, you can do things like sort of adjust those settings, again, without having to push out a new version of your game. We just sort of download those settings from the cloud. But going back to what we were talking about earlier, you can also configure remote config to sort of deliver different experiences to different groups of users. So if you want to make like your in-app store more prominent for users who actually visit your store and buy stuff, you can totally do that. Or if you want to show ads less frequently to users that are spending money and just show ads to the users that haven't spent anything, you can totally do that. Or If you have like a new feature and maybe you want to try it out with sort of a small percentage of your users and then kind of gradually roll that out to more and more of your users, that's also something you can do with remote config. These kind of gradual rollouts, that's actually sort of one of the most popular uses of remote config. A lot of developers like sort of, I'm just going to turn this flag on for 5% of my users, and then once they're sure they haven't ruined their in-game economy or made the game super crashy or that sort of thing, then they kind of can roll it out to a larger and larger percentage of their population until everybody's using it. So it's again sort of really nice way of testing out a new feature if you're not sure how well it's going to be received. Of course, the other way to influence your users is to use notifications. We have Firebase Cloud Messaging for this. Delivers messages natively on Android and routes any appropriate messages to APNS to talk to your iOS users. And just like with remote config, you can send these messages globally, or you can send them to sort of a segmented part of your population based on what you've defined in audiences. So like if you have a new multiplayer feature, but you only want to send it to your users that have played a multiplayer game in the last 30 days, you can do that, right? So you're not bugging your users with notifications that they don't care about. And how do you know if these changes work? Well, hey, look, you can A/B test it, right? We got an A/B testing system that's essentially powered by all these other systems I talked about, right? Remote config for sort of making changes within your game, cloud messaging for sending notifications, and analytics for measuring those results. So you can do something like say, hey, you know what? I want to create an A/B test with 20% of my population who has the latest version of my game. Let's go ahead and try and increase our 7-day retention. And I'm going to do that by experimenting with how much time our users have when they first start a new round. Is it, will they stick around longer if it's harder, or will they get frustrated? Let's find out, right? And we can do the hard work of sort of randomly distributing your audience into the right groups, sending them different in-game experiences using remote config, measuring those results, and then sort of giving you those results side by side so you can see, if any of these changes had any effect on, the stuff that you care about. And the last product I am going to touch on briefly is Firebase Predictions, because we are part of Google, and I am contractually obligated to talk about machine learning in any presentation I give, because we love machine learning. If you think about it, a lot of these examples, we've been looking at audiences where we're grouping users based on their past behavior. And that's fine, but if you really think about it, these groups are often proxies for future behavior, right? Here we're saying, I want to find people that have played, more than 10 games in the last 7 days. But really what we're looking for here is users who we think are probably going to keep playing in the future, right? That's kind of what we're really doing here. And so that's sort of what Firebase Predictions does, is basically we sort of apply a whole bunch of machine learning to your analytics data that gets recorded within your app. And using that information, we can create groups of users based on how likely they are to perform actions in your game in the future. So, you can predict, find me groups of users that are going to spend money or churn out of my game or hit some conversion event. So we can go ahead and, for instance, find people who we think are pretty likely to keep playing our game, folks that are unlikely to churn out, and then do things like, ask them to write a review for us, or, share the game with their friends, or whatever we think we want to do with these sort of users who are likely to keep playing our game. So those are the high points of the sort of user engagement / improve ARPU and products. Sort of a nice set of tools that basically helps you with that whole cycle of sort of analyzing and segmenting and experimenting and taking action, that whole cycle. I should point out, pretty much everything I talked about today is available for Unity and C++. And once your engineers have done sort of the initial kind of setup work to get analytics and remote config working, we have APIs available if you want to sort of ping them remotely. But we also, everything is available for you to sort of run in the Firebase console. So your analytics folks can go ahead and run an A/B test and not have to bug your engineers that probably have something they want to focus on in their latest sprint. So I realize that was an incredibly fast and maybe not particularly deep dive into everything that we have to offer. But our whole point in flying out here and being really jet lagged isn't for us to blather on to all of you, but really for us to hear what you have to say to us. So if you've tried any of our services and you like them, that's great. Let us know what you're using and how we can make it better. If you've tried any of our stuff in the past but stopped because you ran into some problem, let us know. We'd sort of love to know sort of what those obstacles were, what the deal breakers are for you. And if any of this just kind of sounds vaguely interesting, but you're not quite sold yet or suspicious or have follow-up questions, come by and talk to us, and maybe we can answer some of those questions and put you at ease. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for sitting through this presentation. Enjoy the rest of the conference. I think there's a bunch of good talks coming up. I'm excited to listen in on some of them, and I hope you are too. So go listen to some good presentations, and then in between, come talk to us at the booth. I think we're like right upstairs when you first come in. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.